Due to its vibrant green color and smooth flavor, Fukamushicha, or deep steamed sencha, has become one of the most popular styles of sencha in Japan and abroad. However, this tea often falls short of its promise. So today I'll define what Fukamushicha is, compare it to a regular sencha, and talk a little bit about its history and how it became the most popular form of green tea in Japan. Fukamushicha, or Fukamushi sencha, means deep steamed tea. So that brings up the question, what is steaming and why is tea steamed? Steaming, or jonetsu in Japanese, is one method of stopping oxidation. And in order to make a green tea, you have to stop the tea from oxidizing while it's still green. In China and other tea-producing countries, this is usually done by heating the tea leaves in a hot pan. However, in Japan, the older steaming style is the most popular, as it is quicker, more even, and has less effect on the final taste of the tea, meaning that it is more transparent. If you want to learn more about steaming and how it is done, check out our video on how sencha is made, part 2. So now that we've defined what steaming is, let's take a look at how we get to deep steamed tea. Traditionally, steaming was kept as short as was necessary, as excess moisture from the steam would cause the leaves to stick together and deteriorate. So the original sencha steaming is somewhere around 20 to 40 seconds, depending on the thickness of the leaves. The duration of steaming can be adjusted by changing the angle of the steaming machine or the speed at which the conveyor belt moves. From this basic adjustment, we get 3 rough categories of steaming. Asamushi, or short steamed. This is anything less than 20 seconds. Between 20 and 60 seconds is what's called chumushi, medium steaming, or futsumushi, normal steaming. Anything over 1 minute is Fukamushi, or deep steamed, although long steamed makes more sense because the leaves aren't getting steamed any deeper, it's just longer. Some people use the term tokumushi, or special steaming, if it has been steamed for more than 2 minutes. But all of these times are not strictly defined and they vary a little bit from producer to producer. So if it only takes 20 to 40 seconds to properly steam sencha, why did we start steaming tea for over a minute? Is that a weird enough transition to get us to the history of Fukamushi sencha? I don't know. No one's quite sure when the first deep steam tea was made. There's actually been research put into this to try and write down when it actually happened, but it's generally agreed that sometime in the late 40s to early 50s, farmers in the Makinohara region of Shizuoka were experimenting with longer steaming times. This is because these farmers were struggling to sell their sencha on the domestic market, where it was competing against high-quality teas from the mountains of Shizuoka or from Uji in Kyoto. The flat nature of the Makinohara Plateau means the tea plants there get a lot of direct sunlight, meaning the leaves grow thick and hardy. As a result, the short steaming of traditional processing wasn't long enough to properly steam these tea leaves. And additionally, the extra catechins from the harsh sunlight was causing the tea to be bitter. They discovered that if you steam tea for longer, the extra moisture from the extra steam causes the leaves to become more fragile and break apart into smaller pieces during the rest of processing. This releases pectin from the tea leaves, reducing the perceived astringency and bitterness of the tea and adding more body and sweetness. The downside, however, is that the tea doesn't look very nice. To show you, let's look at a regularly steamed sencha, Asanagi, compared to a deep steamed sencha, Senryu. As you can see with the regular steamed sencha, the tea has a sort of needle-like shape from the rolling and is quite pretty and glossy. Comparatively, the deep steamed tea is full of these broken leaves and sort of powdery bits, which happens when the leaf breaks apart during rolling. However, this deep steam sencha isn't actually as deep steamed as many other deep steam senchas. Let me get you another example. Here we have a deep steam sencha from Shizuoka, and you can see just how broken and powdery the leaves are. And color-wise, it is also a lot more yellow compared to the tea from Uji or this tea from Yame, and this is due again to the harsh sunlight that tea receives on the flatlands of Shizuoka. In the 1950s and 60s, when Fukamushi was being developed, tea was still sold primarily on its appearance, and people expected good tea to look something more like this, with clearly defined glossy needles. This, in comparison, looks much less appetizing. But the improvement to the taste from the older style of Makinohara tea was drastic enough that it became quite popular, especially in Tokyo, where the tap water was really bad still, and the powdery style of the tea meant that it could be brewed quicker, which lent itself to the fast-moving, developing, burgeoning society of 1960s Tokyo. As Fukamushi exploded in popularity, the industry needed to adjust a little bit to adapt. Fukamushicha became a category in national competitions in 1977. Clay teapots had to have metal filters to adapt to these really fine broken tea leaves. Eventually, these would be replaced by fine ceramic filters, but that came a little later. But perhaps the most important impact was the scaling up of production that had to happen to meet the growing demand for this tea. The extra moisture that comes with deep steaming causes some issues down the line, which can be sorted relatively easily on a small production scale, but at the larger production lines that were becoming more common, these issues kept compounding and the quality of tea began to decline, especially as a lot of second harvest tea was being used to produce cheap Fukamushicha. Deep steaming has another downside, and that is a loss in origin characteristics. You can kind of think of this like roasting in coffee. Light steaming is more transparent and keeps a lot of these origin characteristics, these unique qualities that make a singular tea special and interesting. Steaming lightly keeps those intact, whereas steaming deeply sort of erases them and you get the sort of generic deep steamed tea taste. So after 60 years of Fukamushicha, the vast majority of them on the market are cheap, don't taste very good, and they all kind of taste the same. So when we were trying to source a Fukamushicha for our lineup of senchas, we had a hard time finding a tea that was interesting enough and high quality enough to make it stand out from the rest. And we found one in our Senryu, a deep steamed tea from Kuma-en in Yame. And this tea is a blend of Yabukita and Okuyukata cultivars that has been slightly shaded, giving it a little bit of extra smoothness. And instead of being incredibly deep steamed, it's on the moderate side of deep steaming, so you get the same vibrancy and smoothness that you'd expect from a Fukamushicha, but with a lot more of the punchy origin characteristics that make Yamecha so interesting. All this talk about tea has made me very thirsty, so it's time to put the kettle on. But before we brew the tea, here's a special message from this video's sponsor, which is me. Hello, I'm David from Tezumi. I've introduced myself before, but I've never introduced my company. Here at Tezumi, wait a second, there's hot water. Thank you, Strange Tree Man. Here at Tezumi, we source the highest quality Japanese tea that we can find by visiting the best farms in Japan. We also source high quality Japanese teaware and incredibly beautiful handmade ceramics, all so that you can have the highest quality cup of Japanese tea, or bowl in this case. How do I end this? To brew both of these teas, I'll be using a 2 gram to 50 milliliter ratio. So I've got 2 grams of sencha weighed out, and I have some 50 milliliter cups. I'll be brewing both of them at around 80 degrees Celsius. And for those of you that don't have a temperature control kettle, I'll be showing you a little trick. So first, I'll put the tea leaves into the teapots. Yeah, that'll do. As you might have noticed, I didn't preheat the teapots, and that's because I'm going to be using them to cool down the water. Here I have some boiling water, and when you pour boiling water into a ceramic vessel, say a cup, it'll cool down by around 10 degrees Celsius. So going from 100 to 90, and then when I pour it from the cups into the kyusu, it'll go from 90 to 80-ish, probably a little less because it's cooling now and it was not fully boiling. But that's the idea. And I've also measured out the exact amount of water I need to fill my cups. One of the idiosyncrasies of brewing Fukamushi Sencha is that because of the fine broken leaves, it infuses much quicker. So I will keep this one brewing for a minute, and I'll only brew this one for about 30 to 45 seconds. Obviously, these are two different colors. One of them is yellow, and one of them is green. The yellow one is Asanagi, which is an unshaded and light to medium steamed sencha. And the Senryu is green, partially because of the deeper steaming, which causes more of the fine particulate, the green part of the tea, to get into the cup, and also because it is slightly shaded, which makes the tea leaf slightly greener. Now it's time to taste them. Asanagi has the sort of classic uji taste profile and has a lot of nice aromatics, as well as a smooth body with a good amount of umami, but not a wild amount by any means. In comparison, the Senryu is a much more rounded and bold flavor, with less of those bright aromatic top notes and more body and a little bit more kick as well. While neither of them have any bitterness, the Asanagi does have a little bit of the astringency that you associate with the green tea, especially a light steamed sencha. It's a good amount of astringency, nothing overwhelming, but it's definitely there, which gives this tea a little bit more structure to its taste. This one has practically no astringency, being very smooth and mellow. For the second infusion, I'll do a flash steeping, as in hot water in, hot water out for both of them, and you'll see an even bigger difference, I think. For the second infusion, the water will be a little hotter than the first one, but the shorter steeping will sort of balance out the effect. A left-handed pour on a right-handed kyusu. Again, the visual difference is stark. The Asamushi is clear and yellow, while the Fukamushi is a vibrant green, but also very cloudy. This cloudiness comes from all of the broken leaf parts that get through the filter and into the tea. This is one of the characteristic visual aspects of Fukamushicha. A minor side effect of this is that because you're drinking more tiny bits of leaf when you drink deep steamed tea, you're actually consuming more of the catechins and antioxidants, which in a way makes Fukamushicha slightly healthier, although the difference is very minor. It's not quite as stark as drinking matcha versus sencha, for example. Again, the taste here is very clear, very transparent, quite crisp. And some of that crispness comes from the presence of these top aromatic notes, but also again from the tiny amount of structural astringency that's present in light steamed teas. Again, the deep steamed is a little softer, a little rounder, a little more mellowed out. It has less of the sort of pointed notes of the Asamushi, although it still has a distinct and clear taste. And there's also an aspect of a sort of almost juicy type of sweetness, probably because of the additional pectin from the broken tea leaves. As you can see from the leaves themselves, the Asamushi is much more intact, while the Fukamushi forms a sort of mush of broken tea leaves. While both of these teas could go for a third infusion, I'll actually do a little comparison between our Senryu and a more generic Fukamushi Sencha to show you why I think this tea is so special and fantastic. Again, we have an obvious difference in color. One of these is a clear, vibrant green, and the other one is a sort of murky, muddy yellow-green. But let's not judge them by appearances alone, and let's give them a taste. So while there is no astringency here, there's still a bit of bitterness present because this isn't a very good tea. Flavor-wise, it's a bit flat. I couldn't tell you exactly where in Japan this was from if I didn't already know that it was from Shizuoka. There's no sort of origin characteristics present here. It's just the sort of generic deep steamed taste with a bit of roastiness that comes from higide or firing. Comparatively, this one's just so much richer and more interesting, with a lot more depth of flavor. There's these more aromatic notes, as well as a sort of round body and juicy umami. It's just altogether a more enjoyable tea. This goes to show that not all Fukamushicha is made equal. A lot of it is, admittedly, very generic and very bland, but there exists absolutely fantastic specialty deep steam tea, and this is one of them. The difference here is the passion and dedication that the team at Kumaen puts into producing their teas. They've won awards for their gyokuro and their matcha, and they put the same amount of dedication and quality into their deep steamed sencha, which is why we're so glad to have found this tea and why I'm happy to be able to share it with you to show you that there are some absolutely wonderful Fukamushicha out there. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, give it a like, and let me know down below in the comments if you prefer Fukamushi Sencha, or if you've tried a lot of different ones and you found them to be a little bit underwhelming. If you want to see more videos like this in the future, make sure you hit subscribe, and as always, I'll leave all the links to the tea and teaware I used in the description. Thank you very much for watching, and have a nice day. Let me finish this.